The most powerful force on earth is a human soul on fire. You have a deep ache in your soul for something more, to come alive, to let your passion pour from you like an endless well. When your passion comes alive, the magnificence buried deep inside of you is unleashed. Gifts and talents you never realized surface as your life unfolds like poetry. You can do hard things. I can show you how. This is Thrive Yoga Fit Transformational Coaching, where I teach you how to heal yourself from the inside out.
All right, so Karma and Lila.
What's your question?
So, can you have belief in both? So it seems like tantrikas are more invested in the idea of Lila, the cosmic play, the cosmic dance, just, I don't know, being in the moment and embracing the veil of Maya and dancing with it. And like people who are more focused on karma, they might seem more focused on dharma as well, right? So because they're trying to, clean themselves for this lifetime so that next birth, maybe they have it a little bit better. And it's like this seemingly endless process of like cleansing and cleansing and cleansing. And Lila seems a little bit more relaxed, but, I've just been thinking about this lately, like with Lila, it's, like you get this one lifetime. And then I guess my question is like, what happens to the energy if it can't be created nor destroyed, and with like karma and rebirths, like, you would be cleansing for the next lifetime. So in the end with Lila, like what happens?
Well, just to address some of the things you said, I don't think all tantrikas share the assumption that you're only here for one life. I don't think that at all.
No, I'm not. I wasn't. Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that. I was saying that, like in the idea of Lila, I was asking for clarity on that.
So, if we talk about karma and dharma, the two concepts kind of depend on one another in a certain way to make each other like maximally intelligible. So, dharma. Everyone on social media is going to say like, oh, my dharma. And they're usually saying like, oh, this thing that gives me purpose in my life and I enjoy doing it. But dharma is really supposed to be rooted in the hungers and fears of others, right? So like some sort of combination of that with sometimes observance of law and duty, but not always necessarily, because, the stories kind of illustrate this perfectly, where in the Ramayana, the two are the same in terms of like law and concerning oneself for the hungers and fears of others, because Ram as a prince does it right? He upholds everything he does is to uphold the honor of the Raghu clan, so that the Raghu clan, and like he as a prince and scion of the Raghu clan, like so that they can be a good kingdom and serve the people well. That's why he does all that stuff, not for personal aggrandizement. Whereas like in the Mahabharata, all the Kaurava princes, they make the law, but they're totally not concerned with dharma at all. So things that are legal or, in ways that they bind people's duty to them are not dharmic. They're like all just, at the end, it's just to serve their own individual egos. So that when you think of karma, how it relates to that, karma, like as an action-reaction force, is in the backdrop, and the way that people talk about karma and reducing their karmic footprint. It's not necessarily just like for their own personal karmic footprint. Like in a way, they're trying to like lubricate the karma of the greater world around them as well.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, because it's all one connected consciousness.
Yeah,
sure.
if they're doing it right. But
yeah.
So you have this idea of Lila, which is play, where some people could accuse it of being like a more happy-go-lucky flavor of fatalism in a way, because here's Vishnu, he descends to the world in avatars and exemplifies the idea of Lila, where he's just like, he could just hang around in eternal realms and be infinite and boundless and be satisfied with that, but he willingly descends into the veil of Maya, and also demonstrates that Maya has value, right? So if it didn't have value, he wouldn't bother. He would just go meditate all day like Shiva, right?
Right.
So, earlier before we were recording, you were saying like, well, how do you reconcile this idea of Lila with karma? And the answer I gave is like, hey, I'll give you a 3-sentence answer or a 3-word sentence, and I'll even put music to it to kind of give you the shortest snapshot I can of it, which is whistle while you work, right?
You know,
So,
if you say it in the song, I'm going to know it better. So
yeah. So what does Krishna do? He's like, just to exemplify this idea a little bit, he is in the middle of his own Leela experience where he could be infinite and boundless, but he's taking on a limited form on purpose so that he can participate in the world. And he's doing work. Not only is he doing work, but he's preaching to Arjuna the value of doing egoless work, right? Saying like, hey, yes, don't renounce action, do action, but do it without ego investment and do it in a way that's aligned with Dharma, right? Aligning yourself with the hunger and fear of others and all that stuff.
So then why is he doing it? Like, what I want to say is like, there has to be at least a little bit of egoism, because if you're interested or attracted to something, even if it's just play, there's some sort of egoism that's involved in it.
So the whole idea of, this is one of the things that you touch on when people characterize Krishna as the attractive God. Like he's always described as very attractive and not,
He ain't bad on, I mean, he ain't hard on the eyes.
The way they describe him is that he's like attractive in both masculine and feminine ways. And as a child, he's also attractive in the way that child are, not in a pederast or pedophile kind of way, more in the way that like a beautiful child attracts the attention of adults who want to play with it and nurture it. And like, so even as he's like baby Krishna, he's this attractive force where he's attracting love from his community, and everyone just wants to like
a loving energy, like you're like, oh wow, that person has a good vibe, that person has great energy, like you just want to be near them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, gotcha.
And he's that way as an adult too. So he certainly has enemies who hate him, but the enemies who hate him are categorically always the one who are the deepest in their own ego investment. Everybody else either like, even if they don't adore him, but most people do adore him, even those who don't adore him, if they're not like completely bound up in their own ego, they at least like honor and revere him, or at least recognize him as being transcendently special, right? But that, as Krishna is here on the earth doing work and preaching the value of doing this work to others, like saying, hey, Arjuna, no, they're like, don't meditate under a tree and throw down your bow, like do some good work, but do it for the right reasons. He's also doing this. His whole biography is filled with him doing work on purpose. When Krishna comes down to earth, he doesn't throw it all away and go meditate under a tree and say, screw everybody else. He does things to try to stitch back together broken areas of Dharma, like for the sake of people everywhere, like all the kingdoms he interacts with, all the people. And he's there to improve everybody's life, no matter what social station they're in. He's there, and he's there to restore the earth, because the earth, as in one goddess form or another, is usually asking Vishnu to come down and help, because the earth is like groaning under the weight of corruption from ego-driven people, right? So, but he does it in a spirit of play. By the time he gets to all of his incarnations have the aspect of Leela, but it becomes the most flavorful and explicit by the time he reaches the Krishna avatar. Because what does he do? He plays music. He cavorts with women, like the gopis. He has a bromance with his friend Arjuna. Like, that's the thing. If you just read the Bhagavad Gita, you think like, oh, like they think of each other as like, it's like this distant gulf of like God and devotee. But no, like the greater story, Arjuna is his pal. It's like a buddy movie, like one of those bromance movies, right? Like I'm trying to think of those two Hollywood actors who they always used to pair together in bromance movies. I forget their name, but in the 60s
like
and
Seth
70s.
Rogen. No, I was thinking like Seth Rogen and
like in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, like that kind of stuff. They have that kind of dynamic, except one of them happens to be the supreme god of the universe, and the other happens to be this mutually important devotee figure, because they're also Nara and Narayana. They're incarnations of an earlier lifetime where they were Nara and Narayana, who were two like deeply important sages to the cosmos who also battled asuras, meaning like the subterranean. So, oh yeah, that's the other thing I mentioned. So you get this idea also in the stories where, because you asked about like doing, people just concerning themselves with doing like disciplines or something and maybe missing out on the play. I don't know. I forget how this came up, but
yeah, I mean, you started mentioning how there's devotees of Shiva that have like great tapasyans who just do lots of agnihotra and like mantra and
well, they might not necessarily do agnihotra because that's more of like Vedic-y stuff. But like if they're very devoted to Shiva and they're like doing forest disciplines or whatever, like this is one of the things,
making puja and honoring every day. And
yeah, or doing like tantric disciplines and stuff. So that's one of the things the stories also demonstrate is like in the Ramayana, Ram, who is not called a yogi but definitely is a yogi because everything he's doing is like all his disciplines are meant to bind the community together again and restore dharma. But Ravana, who's incredibly accomplished, he's a very devoted devotee of Shiva and probably like a preeminent one, right? Like he does all the disciplines. He's a polymath. He's brilliant in all these yogic sciences, and he's a brilliant musician, architect, all these other things. He's like the overachiever archetype, except he does it all for egoic reasons. So
can you build those things? So you can still build those things, but in the name of service. And then when you do that, you still get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, so to speak. But it's like you're sharing, like rather than having the fruit to yourself, it's like you're sharing. If you had a bunch of grapes, you're giving a grape to everyone.
Yeah, kind of. And the idea, even the aspect of like enjoying the fruits of your labor, there's still a little bit of this sense of not just like purely selfishly enjoying whatever you're doing, but like there's this idea that the best and highest enjoyment of all these things is not like personal achievement or even like a hedonistic enjoyment of the literal, like let's say one of the literal fruits of your labor is that now you can buy money for the best grapes in the world. And that's a funny example, right? But like, it's pretty on the nose as far as enjoying the fruits of your labor, right? Mm-hmm. Like a kind of karma yoga and dharmic way of enjoying the fruits of your labor would at least recognize those bodily pleasures and stuff, but not get lost in them and have this simultaneous, like the true enjoyment that you get out of it would be like how much you're satisfying the hungers of others and the fears of others, like that kind of thing. Like how, like if you get pure enjoyment out of doing something that serves as a devotee, like if you're like, yeah, I did all this awesome overachieving stuff, but like I quote unquote devoted it to Krishna, which is a shorthand for saying like I devoted it for that which is best for Dharma for the whole world and which brings everyone up and puts us all closer to the like transcendent, expanded consciousness and the yoga.
Well, the thing is, with Ravana devoting all of his practices to Shiva is like the concept of absolute and like consciousness before it came into creation with Prakriti or Shakti. So I guess like the fact that he could get caught up in the egoism still by devoting everything, because that is like Ishwara. Shiva would be the stand-in for Ishwara, or like the form of Ishwara, because Ishwara is formless. So I guess I'm like, but if he's like devoting all of that effort to this like deity, I guess it's like kind of confusing how his mind can still be so unpure, because it's like when you're on the path of like dedicating yourself to, service to others. But I mean, I guess I can see that, like, I have seen people like in the healing field who they say, oh, I'm in service to others, but their ego becomes inflated to where it sort of blinds their insight.
So one of the keys that'll open all this up for you is, if you think of it this way, Vishnu is concerned about things like Dharma. Shiva is not necessarily. Shiva then goes even further beyond that, because like Dharma is all a part of Sanskriti or culture. So there's Prakriti, nature, Sanskriti, culture, and then all the Shiva stuff even beyond both of those, like getting closer to Purusha, like all the
So what's the overall goal?
It's not even that there necessarily has to be an overall goal. These are different ways of living your life. So the part of the message in these, because you also have to ask, like, who wrote these stories and for what reason, right? What were they trying to say, and like whose agenda were they kind of trying to like promote, right? But there's an old trope of a bunch, like in the medieval tantrikas, wandering around like, scary looking ascetic wizards, who a lot of these tantrikas were explicitly interested in expanding their personal power. They weren't trying to serve the community better. They were like, I'm on a very personal journey of expanding my capabilities for myself. And that's kind of something that touches on the same issue that Ravana gets into, because Shiva in these stories will recognize someone's disciplines and austerities no matter what their intention is. If they do the work and they get accomplished enough in the work and their discipline is strong enough, they get rewards. He doesn't care how they spend the rewards. It's not his department, because he's beyond all those concerns. This is the mendicant God, the God who goes outside of society and lives in crematoriums. And then you get other kind of variations on that theme later, where they try to make Shiva into the reluctant householder with Parvati, like kind of gulling him into starting a family when he didn't want to, and all this stuff. And he's still basically an absentee father, still basically an absentee husband for the most part, except when he occasionally wants to share Parvati's embrace. But when he has his kids, Kartikeya and Ganesha, all the things that Shiva could be capable of doing, except that he wants to go meditate and do yoga all day, the kids do for him. And they still share aspects of Shiva, but they have a little bit more of that community service thing woven into their character. He kind of like outsources that, because no matter how much you try to trick Shiva into serving the community, he'll only ever do it remotely. And he'll only ever like do it intermittently, and he'll almost never do it in like a beautiful form. There's very rare instances where anything like that happens, like when he finally does show up to marry Parvati and like dresses the part a little bit for like a minute, and then almost immediately afterwards like changes out of that disguise of the well-dressed guy and goes right back to the animal skins and the matted hair and all that almost immediately. And Parvati's like, I need a house, and he's like, oh, let's just live in a crematorium or under a tree. And she's like, no, you idiot, I need a house. So then then who do they actually get to build a house? Ravana, right? But then Ravana builds this amazing house, and when Shiva says, I'm so pleased with your work, what do you want as your boon? He's like, oh, actually this house. And he's like, oh, okay. Much to Parvati's chagrin. She's like, you idiot.
Why do you keep doing it? Did they build another house?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but in the meantime, like, the house that they built for Shiva, they got to, all of a sudden Ravana gets it. And he's like, okay, well, it's mine. And Shiva's like, yeah, that checks out. It's fine.
I have to say I'd be mad too. I take Parvati's side on that. So, then if one is to embrace like the aspect of Lila and say like, less on the karmic side of things, like what happens in the end? It's just, you go back to earth dust and that's that.
I guess it depends on which faction you're talking to. If you're talking to like a Vishnu devotee, they might say that if you're reducing your karmic footprint well enough and you're being a good devotee, then like maybe you're narrowing down closer and closer and closer to getting away from the karmic burden all the time, right? If you ask a yogi, like Patanjali style yogi, they say, well, it's really about getting to samadhi. That's how you get off. You're going to have these experiences of samadhi, but that doesn't mean you're going to get off the karmic wheel forever.
Yeah.
And from a certain perspective, they might even say, and why would you want to, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
epigenetically, though, if you do the work, supposedly it's imprinted into your next lifetime, supposedly.
Yeah, or your kids. And to that, I can't speak. But then if you ask Shiva devotees, they might indeed say that, you can bring your consciousness to a point where it penetrates past all that stuff. Not in the way that Buddhists do, where they say it like they reduce it all to nothing.
To nothingness, yeah.
But where they're more like, okay, we're going to zero in on the infinite, boundless, whatever, But it also depends on which Shaivite you're talking to, because, Tantrikas are very often Shaivites, and they have a very different idea about a lot of this stuff than, let's say, some of the Shaivites who might be, like, throwing away their life and living in a crematorium,
Yeah.
Very different interpretations.
Or they could just look at it as play.
Yeah. So
then what's to be said about, because I feel like I was like, you always pull it back to yourself to understand these things, and that's certainly what I'm doing. And so I feel like I do have a sort of, I'm service driven as far as helping my community come together. And, our 300 students are about to graduate next weekend, actually. And a lot of them are graduating, like actually going into careers as yoga therapists. Amanda, Pam, Derek, Kat, Lindsay's even finding a way. And I think Chrissy and Sarah are finding their way too. So like, I feel like as far as the service aspect, I definitely have that about me, and it definitely drives a lot of my actions. But, there's like, as far as like human pleasure, like I'm in a relationship with you. I love you. I love our intimacy. And I love the playtime that we have. So I guess to me, what makes sense is having a balance of the two, and like, is that possible?
Yeah, and I think one of the answers that people would come up with is enjoy the fleeting rewards without attachment. Like
whistle while you work.
With an with an attitude of appreciation while they're here, but not getting attached to them.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So you can, if you did well, you got some material rewards. You can say, oh, that's nice, but not, oh, this is the swaddling cloth that I'm going to walk around in experientially every day of my life. Like, oh, what would I do if I didn't have my house? Oh, what would I do if I didn't have my nice toys? Oh,
yeah, it's good to definitely, and maybe sometime in our lifetime, I'd want to purge everything and just, go hiking around or something.
Yeah.
May I ask, what is your personal standpoint as far as like how you live your life?
I try not to be too attached to a lot of these things, but of course, I have my little holdouts of attachment. But most of my holdouts of attachment only have to do with parts of my identity that I haven't resigned to the dustbin completely. Like, for example, the fact that I still have rolled up jiu-jitsu mats in the garage, and I'm like, oh, well, how can I find a way to store them? It's not because they're childhood toys I don't want to part with. It's because a big part of me is like, hey, that could still very realistically be an authentic expression of my identity if some of my material circumstances change a little bit. But even that, you could say, like, hey, that's also a little bit too much attachment. You should be ready to let that part of your potentiality or identity go if things just are not lining up that way.
Do you think by completely letting it go, how sometimes when you let something go and then, you just take a break from it for a while, all of a sudden you come back to it with more clarity, or it comes back in a different way in your life?
Yeah, of course. Those things happen all the time.
You're very matter of fact. I like, how can you relate it to you?
Well, that exact same example that we just came up with, I don't act...
No, I mean when you release something and then it comes back to you.
Yeah, like I said, that exact same example. This current phase where I'm like, I'm not actively opening up my own dojo right now, but I at least have those mats in storage. I'm not keeping that at the forefront of my intentions, my wishes, my whatever, but down the set, it's literally just like a little sleeper agent thought in the back of my consciousness somewhere. But when certain circumstances might realign all of a sudden, like after I've already released for a little bit, or at least put the snooze button of attachment on that pretty considerably, that one might pop out again, to where I'm not just like teaching once or twice a week, but like running my own dojo. I might never do that again. I have no idea, but that current non-attachment to it definitely still leaves the door open for a future where I can do those things again.
I find that like non-attachment, the vairagyam, it's like when you're too attached to something or someone, it's like your egoic energy around it, like it sort of projects around it.
Yeah.
And it makes it very finite. And it's like when you practice non-attachment and you like let it go out into the ether, so to speak, it is wrapped more around with universal forces and energy. Does that make sense? Am I getting too woo?
I don't know.
Okay.
Just go with it.
Okay. And there's certain aspects of this reality that cannot be made from the mind, right? I mean, it's just, you surrender, you let go, like you meditate, you get clarity about things. And then when you detach from these things, a lot of times they'll come back to your life in a new and interesting way, in a way that you couldn't ever have dreamed up. For example, me owning 2 yoga studios, something that I mean, eventually came into the foreground of my mind, but, you know, maybe 10 years ago, a little bit longer than 10 years ago, I could never imagine ever having anything so nice.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
and certainly not being such a leader in my community. And I attribute being able to allow the universal forces to kind of work through me as a servant. And for me, that's like the greatest honor. But sometimes I like to hit the pause button from being a servant and go play. And
Yeah,
go to my
sure.
yoga festivals.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And one little colorful pop culture example that can maybe make this more clear, as far as the thing you said about non-attachment to, I don't know. But, you know, Darth Vader in the Star Wars movies and everything is the villain because he has all of that yogic discipline training, like using the Force and all that stuff, but he can't let go of his attachment. That is the thing that turns him into the evil demon character, because his attachment to his wife Padme and the anxieties that he has about her dying and all this other thing, it drives him. He's so attached that he's willing to violate any bond, any trust, do anything possible for the sake of that love. But it's not even a pure love that he's doing that for. It's like still very personally attached, like still very wound up in what she means to him, you know, like especially when you look at his biography, like he was raised as a slave and he didn't have, like, you know, his mother was taken away from him and all these other things. So Padme is like the love constant that he has in his life for him. And he's so attached to her and the role that she played. I mean, there's probably some authentic love built in there too, of course, but it takes a dark turn when that aspect of his attachment makes it impossible for him to let her go, because she's the only, like, relationship constant outside of his, you know, Jedi teachers like Obi-Wan Kenobi or whatever. Like, so but he can't be his true authentic self with Obi-Wan Kenobi. He can only be his true authentic self with Padme and their secret marriage, right? And when he's getting these premonitions over and over and over again that she's going to die, he actually makes it happen in a very Greek tragedy way, right? And that attachment and his absolute inability, it's not even anywhere on his radar to not be attached. It's not even on his agenda, despite his whole life, everyone telling him, don't be attached, don't be attached, don't be attached. You're too powerful for that. Like you will go, as powerful as you are, all that will become like negative demon energy if you do that. He hears it his whole life and doesn't give a shit. It's not even anywhere on his radar to consider not being that attached. And so in our own lives, when we're that attached, not only to the material things around us, but even to our relationships, when we're like, well, I'll do anything to save this marriage.
You sacrifice everything.
Yeah, if your marriage is about to crumble because of financial stuff and someone's in the position where they're like, well, shit, I'll steal from my job or I'll steal from my customers just to keep, you know, my head above water, just to save this marriage. They're sacrificing everything for that attachment. And if their partner knew that they were doing that, then most of them would never put up with that kind of stuff, which means like they're not even acting in alignment with true love anyway.
Yeah. It's like a kind of, to me, like the parallels, like it's like this egoic, I'm going to say the word dharma, but like in the way that you're just like so driven by it, like it just becomes like the single most powerful force in your life, because you're just like, it's like the blinders are on. But it kind of reminds me of, like Ram, like didn't he, like he just sacrificed everything. He was just like so pure in the name of Dharma that like even, he was such a service for his community that like at a certain point he was almost like not human because he was so dedicated to that path. So it's like he didn't, expand his vision a little bit more.
So I would say that his vision was expanded, but that he knew how much it would hurt him, but he made a sacrifice anyway. That's the tragedy of Ram.
Yeah.
Whereas by comparison, when you compare him to Dhritarashtra, because you said the blinders thing earlier, that's exactly the point they're making with Dhritarashtra, the blind king in the Mahabharata. They say he's blind, and that's a very on-the-nose thing. He's willing to do anything to keep his kids happy. And to keep, because his son Duryodhan the corrupt prince is always saying, "Oh, I'm going to kill myself if you let those Pandavas inherit the kingdom instead of me." He always threatens suicide and all this stuff. And Dhritarashtra, the blind king, just loves his children and attached to him so much, he lets them literally get away with anything. Yeah. And there's very few moments in the story where he actually puts his foot down. You can count them on your hand how many times he does it. And one of the only times he does it is in the spectacle of Draupadi's pure selflessness when she's given the opportunity for all of these boons after the miracle of her garment not being able to be like removed, because it's just they're all trying to remove her garment in front of everyone. Krishna keeps infinitely feeding her more robe fabric, and only in light of this miracle, when he finally intervenes and gives them back their freedom and offers her boons, after like the third or fourth, I think it's after the third boon, when he's still offering her boon, she says no. Any more would be greed, and greed destroys the earth. It's that same idea. Because that's what he's doing with his greed in the form. It's not that he has material greed, although he's obviously royalty. It's that he has greed for his attachments. That's a form of greed. Like, oh, I'm going to do what's best for my kids no matter what.
That's why I think, I think the mind has a tendency to get, I know that the mind has a tendency to be attached. It's one of the kleshas, raga. So I guess part of this conversation is like with Lila, when you're just looking at life as like a game and a cosmic dance, whatnot. I think it's so much, at least for me, like easier to get caught up in chasing pleasure because it feels good, and like being in the moment, and like you can like channel source, but I think it's very easy to get caught up in the egoism of the mind and project and wrap stories around all these things if you're like dancing in the veil, so to speak. And so having that balance of service to sort of like hit the brakes to sort of like bring you back. It's like why I practice dualism and non-dualism when I go and I do my silent retreats. It's all about separation. And then over time, as the year goes on, it gets closer. And it seems for me, when I have more space between like, okay, this is my mind, these are my thoughts, this is my body, they are separate, and there's consciousness kind of pulsing through, I can engage in Lila more because I'm like, oh, these are my toys, I can use them, not like I am those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so having those practices in place, I find that I like your idea as far as you're not necessarily like dedicated to any of them per se, like monogamously, but you can kind of like put them together and sort of, I don't want to say like cherry pick, because that's like, thinking that you are only using like the best parts of them, but what works best for you in your life. Yeah.
You get to choose your adventure.
Choose your
adventure. Yeah.
Choose your adventure.
And you're choosing your adventure while being conscious that it's a game. And that's one of the key differentiators. So I'll bring it to another real life parallel. I occasionally go down to the comic book shop and play games with the guys, and occasionally some gals too. And you'll see some players eventually like getting frustrated when they lose, and like they get a little rough around the edges sometimes, and they got too attached to the game. Mm-hmm. They forgot that they were just playing a game, and they start getting pissed. And they're like, and they're like, they start talking shit to each other, like, you cheap son of a bitch with that, whatever you did, blah, blah, blah. And like they'll get that, they're kind of just kidding, but you can tell they're authentically getting mad. But Lila, if you're truly doing Lila, that doesn't happen. True Lila is like, even when you're losing the game, you still have a smile on your face because you're like, hey, I got to play.
Yeah, I got to.
And you never forgot that it was a game. You let yourself get lost in the enjoyment of it, but not in the identification with it.
There's on the flip side of that, just having. By the way, thank you for doing this impromptu podcast with me, Matt. By the way, if you're enjoying all the things that Matt's talking about, he does have a podcast called Dharma Nights, available on iTunes. He does releasing weekly still, right?
Yeah, although I did some irregular stuff recently because I did like 3 back-to-back exam prep episodes released 2 days apart from one another.
It's really valuable. So if you're listening to this and you're like going to a yoga teacher training, or if you're a yoga teacher, if you lead trainings, like his stuff is great. I just wanted to mention like how going through this kind of illness that I went through, which if you listen to the last episode, I talked about how I thought it was long COVID, and what I figured out, and again, this is me being my own self-healing advocate, is I'm pretty sure what I have is H. pylori. I have a test coming in tonight to confirm it, but I took a remedy for it and like felt at least 40 to 50% better. I wasn't so attached to my illness to where it got me down, but I recognized that it was something in my life. And so I did practices like my pranayama. I did Sudarshan Kriya for a half an hour every morning. I don't know if you heard me coming out here. And so hum. And then meditation. I mean, I always do it every day, but that including pranayama, my morning practice, probably about an hour. Yoga, like pretty much every day, like ramping it up. I didn't overly identify with it, but because I was able to, but I kept working on it. And I think when people become overly identified with like sickness, illness, it becomes too painful because it's too close, you know? But that being said, I did accept the fact that I was not feeling well, and it actually taught me so many lessons. Like, it's okay to like hang out with your friends. Like I hung out with Anik, and we just walked the pier. And I was like, hey, I probably only have like an hour or 90 minutes in me before I start to crash. And they were totally fine with it and okay. And so being able to accept something like that without being so like attached or like overly associated with it. Because when you do, yeah, you get upset. It's like students when they get super, the 300s when I told them about the test and they were freaking out about your part. And like Amanda was like, oh my God. I was like, y'all.
I gave them the most prep stuff.
Oh my God. I was
anyone.
like, calm the fuck down. And I could see literally it was old patterns, like old like test anxiety. I'm like, this isn't fucking Harvard. This is yoga school. Like, yeah, we challenge you, but like chill. And then they're like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So when you wrap a story around it, you get too close to it. I think that, you know, whether it's something that's like pleasant in your life, like raga or devesha, then you suffer. Then you go into that wheel of samsara, misery. So you want to get off the wheel, as I would say in the Dhamma culture. So that was cool. Thank you so much, Mr. Murph.
My pleasure.
All right. I love you.
I love you too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the podcast and if it's helping you, please consider writing a review. You can go to iTunes or Google Play, go into the search bar and type in Thrive Yoga Fit Transformational Coaching, scroll down, and you can leave a review. This helps other people to find me as well as bumps us up in the search ratings. Also, this podcast is sponsor-free, so that means we don't receive anything for doing it. If you feel so inclined and this podcast is helping to support you and you want to return the favor and help to support any production costs of the podcast, feel free to give a donation to a Venmo link, Thrive Yoga Fit, or PayPal, Erin@erincoach.com. If you don't have the means, don't worry about it. We're not going anywhere. You're all good. But if you would like to give back, you can give back in those ways. Last thing, we have a coaching certification coming up, and it's 7 days of an intensive work, followed by a 3-month mentorship. You will not find another teacher that's more passionate and dedicated than I am to my students and their learning. And not just their learning, but the application and how they show up in their life. If you've been listening to this podcast and it's had a huge impact on your life, just imagine what it would be like to spend 7 intensive days with me and then a 3-month mentorship. You can check that out at thriveyogafit.com/coach-certification. Again, thriveyogafit.com/coach-certification. Thank you so much. Namaste.